China just pulled the rug out from under a $164 billion cornerstone of the U.S. economy. The move isn't just a blow to American farmers, it's a seismic shift in global trade. From canceled soybean contracts to rising global competitors, this move is rewriting the rules of international trade. What led to this turning point, and can the U.S. recover? China's cancellation of U.S. soybean contracts wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was a carefully calculated strategy that struck at the heart of American agriculture. For years, soybeans represented the backbone of U.S. exports to China, peaking at $14 billion annually before the trade war. But as tensions escalated, China began to view its reliance on American soybeans as a liability, not an asset. The result? A dramatic pivot to South America, with billions of dollars in contracts rerouted to Brazil and Argentina. This shift has left American farmers scrambling. Overflowing silos, plummeting prices, and lost market share have turned a thriving sector into a battleground. Joseph Glauber, a senior fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute, explained, China's diversification strategy didn't just reshape the soybean market, it redefined global agricultural power dynamics. The shockwaves have exposed a hard truth. America's agricultural dominance is no longer guaranteed. Please like and subscribe. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us grow. Thank you. The trade war began as a battle of tariffs, but evolved into something far more destructive for U.S. agriculture. When the U.S. imposed tariffs on $250 billion of Chinese goods in 2018, Beijing retaliated with its own tariffs targeting $34 billion in American exports. Soybeans, pork, and corn were hit hardest. With an additional 25% cost added to U.S. soybeans, they became uncompetitive almost overnight. For farmers, this wasn't a temporary disruption. The American Farm Bureau Federation reported that between 2018 and 2022, farm bankruptcies rose by 24%. Entire rural economies were destabilized, as local businesses reliant on farming equipment suppliers, grain processors, and trucking companies suffered the fallout. Chad Hart, an agricultural economist at Iowa State University, noted, "The effects of losing a market as large as China can't be overstated. It's not just about today's losses, it's about the future of American agriculture." China's shift away from U.S. agriculture is part of a broader vision for self-reliance. After the trade war highlighted its vulnerabilities, Beijing implemented a series of strategic policies to reduce dependence on American imports. These included ramping up domestic production, particularly in soybeans, where investments in high-yield farming technologies are beginning to pay off. Heilongjiang Province, for example, has seen soybean output rise by over 20% since 2020. At the same time, China aggressively pursued new trade partnerships with countries like Brazil and Argentina. This diversification wasn't just economic, it was geopolitical. Strengthening ties with South America has given Beijing more leverage in global trade negotiations while simultaneously weakening the U.S.'s influence in the region. Brazil's rise as China's top supplier of soybeans and corn didn't happen by chance. Over the past decade, Brazil has invested heavily in agricultural infrastructure, much of it funded through partnerships with China. Railways like the Ferrogrão project and expanded port facilities along the Atlantic coast have made it cheaper and faster to transport crops to global markets. In 2023, Brazil exported 58 million metric tons of soybeans to China, more than double what the United States managed. Chinese investments in Brazil's agricultural sector have also played a critical role, from funding modern farming equipment to financing large-scale land acquisitions. The result is a streamlined supply chain that has cemented Brazil's dominance. However, this success comes at a cost. The environmental consequences of this agricultural expansion have sparked global concern, an issue we'll examine in more depth shortly. Food security is more than a policy goal for China. It's a cornerstone of national stability. The disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, coupled with the volatility of the trade war, expose the risks of over-reliance on foreign imports. In response, China adopted a dual strategy of increasing domestic production and securing agricultural resources abroad. Domestically, China has invested billions in crop science and land restoration, boosting yields for key staples like soybeans, wheat, and corn. Internationally, Beijing has engaged in land acquisitions across Africa, Eastern Europe, and South America, ensuring long-term access to critical resources. These efforts reflect a recognition that food supply isn't just an economic issue. It's a matter of geopolitical survival. Tariffs were a decisive factor in the economic struggles of United States farmers during the trade war. When the United States imposed tariffs on Chinese goods in 2018, Beijing retaliated with a 25% tariff on United States soybeans, corn, pork, and other agricultural exports. This made United States products uncompetitive, causing soybean exports to China, once worth over $12 billion annually, to drop by more than 60%. Prices fell to decade lows, forcing farmers to store unsold crops while struggling to cover rising input costs for equipment and materials, which were also affected by tariffs. By 2019, soybeans were trading at $8.40 per bushel, down from $10.50 a year earlier. The ripple effects devastated rural economies. Farm bankruptcies hit an 8-year high, with nearly 600 filings in 2020, according to the American Farm Bureau Federation. Businesses tied to agriculture, such as grain processors and equipment suppliers, faced sharp declines, deepening the economic crisis. Chad Hart, an agricultural economist at Iowa State University, noted, "The tariffs didn't just disrupt trade, they disrupted livelihoods. Federal subsidies totaling $28 billion offered temporary relief, but they couldn't address the long-term loss of China as a reliable market, leaving lasting damage to United States agriculture." The rapid agricultural expansion in Brazil and Argentina has transformed these countries into global suppliers, but at a steep environmental cost. In 2023 alone, deforestation in the Amazon rainforest surged by 21%, according to Brazil's National Institute for Space Research. Much of this deforestation is directly linked to soybean cultivation for export to China. The environmental fallout extends beyond deforestation. Soil erosion, water contamination, and loss of biodiversity have become pressing concerns. Yet there are potential solutions. Agroforestry practices, which integrate crops with tree cover, offer a more sustainable path forward. Additionally, international pressure could incentivize Brazil to implement stricter environmental regulations without undermining its agricultural output. In rural America, farming isn't just an industry, it's a way of life. The decline in agricultural exports to China has torn at the fabric of these communities, creating a chain reaction far beyond the farm gates. With fewer buyers for crops, local grain elevators have shut down, trucking companies have reduced routes, and equipment dealers have seen sales plummet. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reported that farm income in the Midwest fell by nearly 20% between 2018 and 2022. The human toll is even more striking. Families who have farmed for generations are being forced to sell their land or take on unsustainable levels of debt to stay afloat. In Nebraska, a family-owned soybean farm that once thrived on exports to China declared bankruptcy in 2021, citing the collapse of trade as its primary cause. Rural schools and clinics, relying on the tax base generated by agriculture, are also facing budget shortfalls, reducing essential services for already struggling communities. The emotional toll is equally devastating. Studies from the National Rural Health Association highlight a rise in mental health crises among farmers, many of whom feel trapped by circumstances beyond their control. It's not just about losing income. It's about losing identity, said one Kansas farmer in an interview with the Wall Street Journal. When you lose your farm, you lose a part of yourself. Recovering market share in China is possible, but it will require significant time, effort, and strategic changes. The trade war created deep distrust between Chinese buyers and American farmers. Even as tariffs have been relaxed on certain goods, China's pivot to South America has cemented new supply chains that are difficult to disrupt. Compounding the challenge is China's domestic investment in agriculture. With its soybean output steadily increasing, the Chinese government's goal of reducing reliance on imports is closer to realization. Moreover, South American producers like Brazil and Argentina offer year-round harvests, giving them a logistical advantage over U.S. farmers. Experts like Joseph Glauber warn that regaining China's trust will require more than competitive pricing. China values reliability and political alignment, Glauber explains. The U.S. needs to offer more than soybeans. It needs to rebuild a partnership that's been deeply fractured. However, all is not lost. Diversifying into alternative markets like India, Southeast Asia, and Europe could help U.S. farmers mitigate the losses from China. Building long-term relationships in these regions may be the key to ensuring a stable future for American agriculture. Agriculture has become one of China's most potent tools for reshaping global geopolitics. By redirecting its agricultural imports away from the U.S. and toward countries like Brazil, China has strengthened its influence in South America, a region historically dominated by U.S. economic and political interests. The Belt and Road Initiative has further solidified these ties, with Chinese investments funding ports, railways, and storage facilities that directly benefit South American exports. This shift has profound geopolitical implications. By deepening economic dependencies in countries like Brazil, China gains leverage in international organizations such as the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. Additionally, China's influence in South America creates a counterbalance to U.S. alliances in the region, signaling a new era of competition for hemispheric dominance. At home, China's ability to diversify its agricultural imports also gives it a strategic edge in trade negotiations. By reducing reliance on any single supplier, Beijing can negotiate from a position of strength, knowing that it has alternative sources to fall back on. This strategy underscores a broader pattern. China's economic policies are designed not just to protect its economy, but to shift the global balance of power in its favor. The U.S. agricultural trade deficit is on track to reach a historic $42.5 billion by 2025, according to projections from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This growing imbalance is driven by two key factors: declining exports and rising imports. The loss of China as a primary buyer of U.S. soybeans, corn, and pork has left a significant gap in export revenues that has not been filled by other markets. Simultaneously, the U.S. is importing more high-value agricultural products, such as tropical fruits, nuts, and processed foods. Changing consumer preferences, combined with competitive pricing from countries like Mexico and Chile, have accelerated this trend. In 2023, U.S. agricultural imports reached $198 billion, a 15% increase from the previous year. This deficit raises serious concerns about the future of U.S. agriculture. If the trend continues, the U.S. could face structural imbalances that undermine its role as a global agricultural powerhouse. Reversing the trend will require targeted policies, including the promotion of exports to emerging markets and investments in infrastructure to reduce production costs. The success of Brazil and Argentina in capturing global agricultural markets offers valuable lessons for U.S. policymakers. First, infrastructure investments have been a game changer for these nations. Brazil's modernized rail networks and expanded port capacity have drastically reduced transportation costs, making its crops more competitive on the global stage. Similarly, Argentina's government has prioritized subsidies for farmers, enabling them to produce high-quality crops at lower prices. The U.S., by contrast, has underinvested in agricultural infrastructure, with many rural roads, railways, and storage facilities in dire need of modernization. Addressing these gaps could help American farmers reduce production costs and improve their global competitiveness. Another lesson lies in market diversification. While U.S. farmers have traditionally relied on China as their primary export market, Brazil and Argentina have cultivated strong trade relationships with multiple countries, reducing their dependence on any single buyer. By expanding its trade partnerships, the U.S. could create a more resilient agricultural sector capable of weathering geopolitical shocks. As China reduces its reliance on U.S. agriculture, American farmers must pivot to alternative strategies to ensure their survival. One promising avenue is the exploration of new export markets. India, for example, is emerging as a major consumer of agricultural products, with a growing middle class driving demand for soybeans, corn, and high-quality meat. Another alternative is shifting towards specialty crops that command higher profit margins. Organic produce, nuts, and niche grains like quinoa and hemp are seeing increased demand in both domestic and international markets. By focusing on these high-value products, farmers can diversify their income streams and reduce reliance on bulk exports. Renewable energy is also an untapped opportunity. Many farmers are leasing their land for solar and wind energy projects, generating supplemental income while contributing to the clean energy transition. However, these shifts require significant investment, training, and policy support to be viable on a large scale. The future of U.S.-China agricultural trade is unlikely to resemble the past. The trade war and its aftermath have fundamentally altered the dynamics between the two nations, with both prioritizing self-reliance and diversification. For the U.S., this means that China may never return as the dominant buyer of its crops. Instead, American farmers will need to embrace a more diversified approach, seeking new markets and adopting innovative practices to remain competitive. For China, the focus will continue to be on securing its food supply through a combination of domestic production, foreign investments, and partnerships with emerging agricultural powerhouses. These strategies not only reduce China's vulnerability to trade disputes, but also position it as a central player in the global food system. As the balance of power shifts, the stakes for global agriculture are higher than ever. The question isn't just who will feed the world, it's who will control the supply. We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe. Check out another video that is now on your screen.